Well, in early 2015, the City Council of Seattle passed what it called a gun violence tax. The tax imposed a $25 levy on every gun purchased in the city, along with a 5-cent tax on every individual round of ammunition. It worked in one way. A lot of gun sellers have fled the city for the suburbs. People lost their jobs. Did it work? In the intended way. It was designed to make Seattle safer. That didn't happen. Shootings are up significantly this year. Murders have doubled. Will the city reconsider its tax? Joining us tonight is Mark Glaze. He's a gun control activist and a former executive director of Everytown for Gun Safety. He joins us tonight. So, Mark, the point was to make Seattle a safer town, but the murder rate doubled. So isn't this a demonstrable failure?
Well, in point of fact, I think the reason that they passed this gun tax was to try and raise some money so that they could study gun violence, which I think is a good thing to do. I don't think a $25 gun tax is the reason murders are up there. The reason murders are up there is that there are a couple of rival gangs who are killing each other with guns. So I hope the universities there use the research money to good purpose.
Well, actually, I'm not arguing that gun deaths are up because of the gun tax. I'm merely noting the obvious, which is the gun tax didn't make the city any safer. What's the point of any of this? Your organization, the studies you're calling for, gun control itself, if it doesn't make a city safer, that's the whole point, right?
Well, look, in fairness to the folks in Seattle, I don't think they imposed a $25 gun tax thinking that that would be a silver bullet, no pun intended, that would stop gun violence in the city. What they, I think, were responding to is the fact that the gun lobby has made it impossible for the federal government to study gun violence. They basically banned the use of federal dollars for that purpose. So they were trying to raise some money to study things that might work, and I hope they use the money
Mark,
for that purpose.
Mark, come on now. Again, the whole point of all of this, the whole point of the studies is to reduce gun violence.
Right.
And it doubled. And so it's hard to take you or people like you seriously if you don't let the data drive your conclusions. And the data here are really clear, crystal clear. This didn't work. So why would you still support it?
Yeah, look, all I'm saying is that nobody in Seattle thought that putting a $25 tax on the sale of guns was actually going to stop gun violence. What they thought it would do, and what it has done.
Yes, they did. They said it would make it a safer city. That's not true. That's what they said. They said it would make it. They didn't say it would end all gun violence, but they said it'll make it a safer city. And the city got more dangerous. And so why are we the only show calling BS on these people who, by the way, won't return anyone's calls? They wouldn't return Fox's calls. They don't want to be held accountable for their dumbness and the fact that their idea didn't work. But, like, why not go back and compare the claims to the results? We're doing that. And, look, it's a failure. So let's try something else, no?
Well, look, I think they should have returned your calls. I really like being on your show. I think they would have enjoyed it. Look, if the gun tax doesn't work, and I think we ought to give it a little bit of time and let things play out and hope that this gang violence subsides, then let's not do the gun tax. Let's look at other things that we actually know the public wants and that are effective. For example, in gun violence, most often, the guns that gang members use are semi-automatics with high-capacity magazines, which, by the way, is the same gun that was used to almost assassinate Steve Scalise. Get rid of those. Why don't we try that in Seattle?
But that's just, your numbers are wrong, actually. A relatively small percentage of murders in this country are committed with rifles of any kind. They're almost all committed with handguns, the murders committed by firearms. So actually, these guns may look scary, and I know they spin you guys into a frenzy because they're terrifying looking, but they don't actually drive the problem. So again, you're wrong.
No, you're totally right about that. What I was saying is that
I know I am.
You always are. Gang violence very often involves those guns. That's what they're using in Seattle. That's what the Scalise shooter used. But you're absolutely right. They're not the biggest part of the problem. The biggest part of the problem is handguns, and we actually know one of the things we could do to reduce gun violence from handguns, which is to impose a universal background check system where everybody who buys a gun, no matter where, can pass a criminal background check. We know that that would save a lot of lives, but the gun lobby stops us from doing it.
We don't know that. We don't know that any more than we know that the Seattle gun tax would reduce violence in Seattle. Like, this is all made. Here's the truth. There are about as many firearms in America as there are people, right around 300 million.
Right.
And as long as there are that many firearms, they're going to be the attendant problems. And also the upsides. I own a lot of firearms. I like firearms. But there are downsides, too. So the only way you can control gun violence with gun control is to confiscate all guns. And that's probably what you'd like to do. So why not be the one guy in your business honest enough to say that?
Let me put it this way. My dad was a gun dealer. I grew up shooting guns, probably just like you. And I'm actually, in theory, open to the idea that we ought to be able to have...
Your dad was a gun dealer?
He was. He was. And he actually believes...
Paging Dr. Freud. What does he think of the fact you're a gun control guy?
Well, he likes it because he believes what I'm about to say, which is, in theory, we ought to be able to have as many guns as we want in this country. But we basically run a pilot project on that proposition, and it has failed catastrophically, which means I think you're absolutely right. Unless we have dramatically fewer guns and we make them dramatically harder to get, it's impossible to craft laws that are going to stop all of the bad guys but let the good guys do what they want. I think we have to have buyback programs.
You also know that states with massive levels of gun ownership, Vermont, Wyoming, have relatively low gun death rates. Vermont's, I think, number 3rd lowest in the country. It's got the loosest gun laws. So there's no connection between the number of guns people have and the number of crimes they commit with those guns. That's just not true. And so you'd have to basically take guns away from people who don't want to give up their guns. What does that look like?
Well, 2 points about that. First of all, the states that have the weakest gun laws tend to have the highest rates of gun crime, though they may be lower in absolute numbers. But, you know, Matt Damon actually said something interesting.
That's not true.
It is true. When he was promoting his movie Born, and he got a little bit of flack about it, but less than I expected. He said, you know, I've been to Australia and people there are pretty happy. They have basically, not just after a mass shooting, they not only banned assault weapons, they actually had the government buy them back. And they have not had a mass shooting since. I happen to think we ought to start thinking about that.
That's not true. That's not true. They didn't buy them back. They confiscated them by force. You had no option. It wasn't voluntary.
No,
if you tried that in this country, you would have a civil war in about 10 minutes. So why not just, like, is that the plan?
No,
is to take people's guns by force? Just say so. I mean, just let us know what the plan is. I'd love to know.
Right. There's a lot of different things we ought to try, and we're not trying them. But we recently, an organization I work with called Guns Down, did a poll, and they actually asked how many likely voters and how many gun owners would support a program where you were required to turn in your assault rifle to the government if the government would buy it back. It had over 65% support, including among gun owners.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the 35% would be pretty tough to crack. And I would be in that group, by the way. So good luck with that, Mark. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks.